Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeremy Yanofsky. Give another round of applause for this amazing heart-filled film. I'm here as the events coordinator for the Los Angeles Makerspace, which, for those of you who don't know, we're a nonprofit, community-driven space that's family-friendly. It's looking to organize all kinds of classes and workshops led by people of all ages to help people, just as the people of If You Build It did in Project H, just learn how to make things again out of anything. It could be design work as they did here in the film, with architecture, could be with programming, could be with soldering, could be with filmmaking, could be with 3D printing, whatever. We have all kinds of workshops that we try to make as affordable as possible for the community. And right now we don't have a permanent location. We used to be in the LA Mart downtown, but we are hoping and crossing our eyes, fingers, and toes to move into the second floor of the Pio Pico Library in Koreatown. If you want to learn more about that, check out our website, lamakerspace.com. We've got all our workshops posted there. We also just recently collaborated with the Hex Lab Makerspace out in the Valley, so if you're in the San Fernando Valley as I am, we're going to be hosting a lot of classes there as well. I'll be hanging around after the Q&A as well. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, whether you want to take some classes or if you're interested in teaching any classes. And again, our teachers are of all ages. I worked with some students over the summer who are like 8 to 10 years old who are teaching me amazing things of how to do with Minecraft. And I mean, yes, we want that. So that's their story. Also, shout out to Venice Arts for being here as well to co-present this event. Emily Pillerton was not able to make it today, but we do have the director and the producers from the film here with us today to answer a couple of questions from you guys. And I'm just going to open up with one big question and then run around with this other mic to all of you to see what you have to say. So without further ado, I want to introduce Patrick Creadon, Neal, Baer, and Christina O'Malley. So my question to you guys, just to open up the floor, is I was really inspired by the story of Kane's Arcade recently, and also just how that movie came to be. And I always wonder of how do people know that things like amazing things like this, like Project H, are happening, and how to be there with the camera and capture everything. For Kane's Arcade, if you haven't heard, this 9-year-old boy in downtown LA started making games out of his father's auto parts business out of cardboard, and just all kinds of people came out of the neighborhood to play his games. And the director found out about it because of all things. He was in the neighborhood and he needed to buy a doorknob. So how did you guys discover these guys?
Well, doorknobs kind of connect to it because Emily's job before she did this was designing doorknobs, and she quit doing that so that she could teach. A couple of years ago, she was designing doorknobs, I think, for the Gap, and she said no more. I read a book. I'm Neal Baer. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Lynn Rashofsky from Venice Arts, for bringing all the filmmakers here, too. I read a book called Design Revolution, 100 Products That Empower People by Emily Pillerton that was sent to me through the TED Talks. And I read it on a transatlantic flight, and I read the whole thing. It was 100 different products. You saw one of them, which was the little cup that they made where they mixed mud with coffee grounds, and it produced holes that then could, as Cameron says, drain out the bacteria and the bugs. But there were 100 different products that are for people, human-centered design that Emily had gathered from around the world, including plants that can change color over landmines if they're planted in places like Mozambique where there are landmines, things like that. So it really grabbed my attention. I thought, how wonderful to make things that really help people's lives. And so I turned to social media and Facebooked her, and we started chatting, and then I arranged to meet with her up in San Francisco where she lives, and she told me that she was going to be teaching a class that she had gotten a fellowship from the Kellogg Foundation to teach in the poorest county in North Carolina. And I thought that would make a great film because she's such a personality, as you saw in the film. And that's always important when you're making a documentary. You have to have somebody who can captivate you. So I went to Pat and Christine, who were friends of mine and have a great reputation. They've made many documentary films, Wordplay about the New York Times crossword puzzle, IOUSA about the debt. And I pitched them this story, and they said yes. And then we started raising the money and going to foundations and that whole long trail. But we started with the MacArthur Foundation, and they gave us our first grant, and that's how we got started. That was 3 years ago? 3.5 years? 3.5 years ago. So it's a long process.
Did either of you have anything to add to that?
I would just say real quickly, especially to the young filmmakers here, step number one, I think, is find a story that you really love. I mean, you got to start there because it's kind of a long road to make a film, even a short film. So figure out something that you want to spend a lot of time with. That's usually a good place to start.
Hi, my name's Grayson, and I'm from Santa Monica. I just want to know what was your favorite part about making this documentary?
I got very good at cornhole. I got good at that game, which was really fun. Christine and I have 3 young daughters. 2 of them are in the back, and I wanted to thank them for being here. Charlotte and Grace, thank you for coming. Congratulations on your soccer victory today, Grace. Even though this story was in a town I'd never heard of, and it was a part of the country I'd never been to, the story felt really personal to us because our kids are in public schools here in LA. And seeing a great idea in a public school really reaching these kids was really powerful for me. And I was lucky to have a couple of really good teachers when I was younger. And watching this film makes me feel like I'm with them again. You know, it makes me feel like that magical moment of what a great teacher can do. I got to see that in this story, and I see it every time I watch the movie. It's very powerful for me. So I'd say that that's my favorite thing.
My favorite part of the movie, and I think what really captures what the film is about, is when they hoist the roof of the chicken coop up. Eric is so proud of it, and it's this wooden roof, but all the work that went into it and all the thinking and designing and studying and looking at Buckminster Fuller and all of that all came together to make this wonderful, beautifully designed building that they never thought they could do before. I also love, my favorite moment in the film is when Jamisha says, "Have I ever designed a building? Let me see. I don't think so." So that makes me chuckle because she's so serious about it. No, I don't think so. So that captured the spirit, that first part about putting up the roof. It's like you see it and it captures it, and what students can do is amazing.
For me, the best part about it was learning about design thinking and human-centered design. It was something that I didn't know anything about. That's a really great fringe benefit of making documentaries, is that while you're making them, you become really knowledgeable about the subject that you're talking about. And that's one of the more exciting parts, I think, about doing documentaries, because it's kind of like you're always taking a class, and you get to learn a little bit about a world that you may not have had a lot of exposure to.
Hi, I'm a teacher. I'm wondering what you are hoping that movie will do, or if you have any investment in any outcomes.
Right now, I think we're hoping that by screening the film, it starts conversations. There's no quick answer, there's no quick fix, as I'm sure you're well aware, to some of the problems that we face in education and public education. This is a really interesting experiment that we were lucky enough to document. And the idea that communities, school groups, parent groups can watch the film and then take something away from that and maybe go back and have a conversation about what are things that can be done in their own communities. So how can we sort of reimagine education in a way that's suitable to that specific community? So I think for us as filmmakers, our hope is that lots of experiences like this keep happening. And I don't know, do you want to add to that?
Just that, as Christine said, that it inspires conversations about new ways of approaching education. As Matt says in the film, he talks about it's in anthropology, economics, history, art, math, and it's a different way than the standardized test approach. It's really a problem-solving approach, and we're showing it to lots of education groups too, and teachers groups, because it is a different way to think about education and the outcomes. And I think it's shown where the kids are taking their quote online PE class in the afternoon and Spanish and everything else, where they're just looking at a computer, and that certainly is not even the wave of the future, but what we're dealing with now. And is that the best way to really engage in an education? So I think that the film tries to let you make your own decision about it, but you certainly saw that the students were more active in the morning.
I'm a public school parent as well and was inspired to come see this for the same reason. I wonder if you have more to say about what you couldn't fit into the film, about the county's baffling decision to end the program, and I'm assuming there was maybe more footage from those meetings, and I would love to hear how that could have possibly happened.
How much time do you have? The decision of the school board to not fund Matt and Emily and their efforts was roundly criticized by the parents and the students and the mayor and the town council and pretty much the whole community. And as much as they, first of all, we tried to get a lot of interviews with them and they declined to be interviewed. But what they would constantly say is, we just don't have the money to support this project. But I don't think that's true. I know that they had a big budget, and I think that what it boiled down to, and what none of them will ever say on the record, is that the person who hired Matt and Emily, the day they fired him, they wanted to eliminate all of his programs and make him a distant memory. And all of his programs, for the most part, did go away, except for Matt and Emily. And now that you've spent time with Matt and Emily, you can tell they just don't back down. They don't get pushed around. And they knew that if they were allowed to teach it, with or without pay, that they were going to go teach it. They put their foot down and did it. One of the parents decided to host a screening and charge $3 a head and send all the money to Berkeley, to Matt and Emily, and to their program, and to thank them and to give them some money for the work that they had done. Great idea, right? And the school board said, well, you're using that fundraiser in a room that, according to the bylaws, cannot be used for fundraising purposes. And we don't want you to break that law, break that code. And Ron Wesson was like, you got to be kidding me. Try to stop us. And they did the screening, and they sent about $330 to Matt and Emily. And 2 of the 5 members of the school board have since been voted out of office. There is fresh blood in the leadership positions in that community. And if you recall Ron Wesson, the gentleman in the red T-shirt with the red sports car, he's grew up in that town and been there, lived there most of his life. He recently was elected one of the county supervisors. This ultimately is really not a story about local politics. I think we tried to show a little bit of that, but that was not the story we went there to tell. We went there to tell a story about what happens when 2 great teachers and 10 young kids get together in a room. That's the story we really wanted to stick to more than any of the others. It's funny because I think, just to sum up, I think that when the movie ends, there are some loose ends. There are a lot of things that have not yet been resolved. And as a filmmaking team, we felt that giving the end of the movie a nice, tidy little, everything will be fine, sort of pat answers to some of these complex questions would not ring true. This story is alive and well. These kids are off to college. Stevie, the kid who's carrying on the family tradition of hating school, he's now a junior at North Carolina State. He made the dean's list his freshman year. He was invited to join an honor society. But he still goes back home every weekend and works on his farm with his parents. So this story is alive and well, and it's going to live for a long, long time. And I think that's the way the film should end in some ways, that we don't have all the answers yet.
Do you have any other little kernels about some of the students? Thank you for sharing that about Stevie.
Oh, yeah, of course. And I will tell you that we thought long and hard about whether we should say, Stevie is now doing this and Jamisha's now doing this. Because the truth is, every time we wrote one of those finales, it would change a week later. Truly. And so there's a card that says, where are they now? And go to the website. And that's updated regularly as to what they're doing. Karan, who was the kid who was really good with computers, he and Stevie and Colin, who was the blonde-haired kid, they're all at NC State. Karan is studying engineering. Colin was going to be pre-med, and now he's doing more environmental studies. And Chris, do you want to explain the program? Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to say about Karan, the thing that happened recently with Karan, which is kind of ties back to the Kane's Arcade story, is that an architecture group just screened the film in Raleigh earlier this month, and they were so impressed with it that they took it upon themselves to reach out to Karan to help support him with his education, because they were so inspired by the work that he did, and he's in an engineering program, like Pat said, at NC State. Things like that happen sort of organically through screening the film that's incredibly rewarding, and that's why it's very hard to sort of put a button on what everybody is doing now, because they're college students and their lives are really, really evolving right now.
It's truly a remarkable impact.
Can you envision this success happening with something that doesn't involve physical activity? Building a building or taking a trip, the success of, outward bound kind of stuff. Can you imagine this success happening, something that's a little more cerebral?
Well, I think it's really about using design thinking or a design-centered approach to solve problems. So Emily says that this is a story, and so does Matt, about these kids in a place that had very little access to fresh fruits and vegetables, obesity, and high unemployment. So that was their story, and they looked for a solution, which is a design thinking approach using science, math, engineering, history, art to solve it. We're working on a project called Action Lab, which is about taking your own story. So hopefully when you saw this, you were inspired about something in your own community here that you might think about doing, and how would you then approach doing that? Whom would you connect with? What organizations would you work with? And we're going to provide all that. It's a way of thinking about taking your story and using all kinds of resources to solve the problem. So you can do that in schools. You could do it in urban schools, rural schools. You don't necessarily need to build, but I think that that's really what Emily's intention is that you really get your hands dirty and you don't have to build a huge farmer's market. You can build a concession stand. That's what Matt's doing right now in Colorado, the second year in North Carolina. So it's really, what do you need? What does your community need? What's the problem that needs to be solved? And then we hope that ultimately kids will take design thinking and that structure that Emily talks about in the film, starting with research up to building, to address bigger problems like how do you think about schools in a new way, or hospitals in a new way, or things like that. But it's just a fresh way of thinking. If you're interested, there's a really nice book called Change by Design by Tim Brown, who's the head of IDEO. And he's been a huge influence on Emily and our work. And it's a way of thinking freshly about problem solving using a multidisciplinary approach.
As filmmakers, when things get frustrating, what keeps you going?
That's a great question. What keeps you going when you're frustrated? I think if you pick the right story or project, that you got to pick something you don't want to quit on. 3.5 years ago is the first time I went to North Carolina. That's when I met Emily and Matt. It was a long time ago, and it was a lot of work to get this done. And I also think it really helps to have an incredible team that you work with. My wife and I work together, and that makes a huge difference for us because we get to go through this together. And Neal has been just a perfect sort of third leg to our tripod, if you will, for this production team that we've had. So that's made a really big difference too.
I would say if you're in documentaries especially, as soon as you get connected with your subjects, then you're kind of in it together. So when it gets difficult, when you're not able to get the interviews that you want to get, or funding gets difficult, or you sort of hit roadblocks along the way, but you know that you now have these partners. Your subjects become your partners in a way, and you're invested, and you want to make sure that you're doing your best to get the story told. I think for us, as soon as we connected with not only Matt and Emily, but those students, and they trusted us, and they let us follow them around and be there when things weren't always great, I think we felt a strong responsibility to make sure that we did our very best to get the story told.
You have to go with the flow, so to speak, when you're doing a documentary, because we didn't know if Matt and Emily were going to be fired. Pretty early on when we were doing the movie, we may have had a different movie where they got fired, and I don't know what the movie would have been. So unless you're a documentary short, unless you're doing a different kind of documentary that's kind of written and structured and you're doing it about a certain subject. But this is a more go with life kind of film that maybe the kinds that you're doing. So you just have to be open to anything that can happen, because some crazy things can happen. And then in the other work I do, where I'm a writer and producer for television, so I did Law & Order Special Victims Unit, or Under the Dome now. As Patrick was saying, you have to really collaborate with great people. You have to have a great director. Pat directed in SVU, and you have to have a great director, a great cinematographer, great wardrobe, great actors, on. And if you can have a great team, then at least when things get a little crazy, you know you can talk to everybody and keep things moving. But if it's divisive or you're not getting along, it's going to be really, and I've seen that in other things and other shows, and it doesn't work, and things fall apart, and it's not fun. And I think the last thing is, it should be fun. If it's not fun, then like why do it? Because it's like so much energy and so much effort. So that's like my especially now, like as I've done this now for 20 years, I say no matter what happens with the network or whatever, it's like as long as it's fun with the writers in our writers' room, then it's worth doing because we really like each other and we get along and we get to tell great stories. But if it's not fun, then I don't want to do it.
And one thing I just want to add real quickly to the young filmmakers here is when you pick a subject, make sure you finish your film. And finishing doesn't mean getting to the end and you're done. Finishing means inviting your friends and family to a screening and having them sit down, maybe pop some popcorn, dim the lights, get the audio set just right, and create a movie-going experience, even if your film is 1 minute long or 3 minutes long or 8 minutes long, because it's the whole experience from start to finish that makes you a filmmaker, really.
Well, thank you all so much. Very inspiring. Let's give a round of applause.
You guys are great.